Hey everyone, welcome to Books, Gurs, and Purrs. My name's Leslie. Every month I talk about what books I've read, and this segment is going to be different. I'll be reviewing Interview the Vampire, the new television show on AMC. Reviewing television shows was something that I was never going to do, but I'm just such a huge fan of not just the Vampire Chronicles. I love the Vampire Chronicles, but very specifically that first book, Interview the Vampire. Like so many others, I'm just a huge fan, and I've been loving the show. I've watched 3 episodes so far, and so I just wanted to talk about them. I want to discuss the show beat by beat, what happens in each episode, but also, I'm sorry, getting distracted by my cats. At the end of each episode, I kind of want to talk about either what I liked about it or what predictions I have for future episodes or the overall show. I'll try to think of some questions, what kind of questions do the characters or the episode elicit and whatnot. So the first episode is called In Throes of Increasing Wonder. Just the title alone, if you look at all the other titles of the show, they're naming each episode after text from the book. So right off the bat, I love that. Something else before I talk about the episode is that I knew in my heart as a giant fan that I would love the show no matter what. I'm an amiable person when it comes to adaptations. I'm not nitpicky. I know that's part of the fandom, is that some fans, not all, will kind of like pick at what the changes are. I'm not like that. I understand that adaptations are just that, and in order to grab the text to a visual medium, there's just going to have to be changes to make it work. And just, my greatest hope for the show was just that it would be at its core what Anne Rice was trying to get across thematically, and at the core each character would hold what makes those characters truly authentically themselves. The only thing that would remotely be nitpicky, that I know I'm actually being unreasonable is that in the adaptation, I really wanted the character of Paul, who is Louie's brother, to be in the show. So before I started the show, that was like my hopes for the show. That being said, I'm going to be kind of looking down at my notes while I talk, and my cat is shaking my laptop. All right, so right off the bat, one of the changes that is made is that the story takes place in New Orleans, much like the book, but this is taking place in Jim Crow America, in Storyville, this time in America where like prostitution was temporarily legal. And instead of, in the books, it takes place, what is it, the 1800s? I'm already forgetting at what time it takes place, but in the books, Louis is a plantation owner, as where in this show, right off the bat, that his character's family lineage still own plantations, but that by the time we meet Louis, he has inherited the wealth from that, and he's doing something very different. He's a pimp in Storyville. The introduction of the very first episode shows Daniel Malloy, who is the interviewer for Interview of the Vampire, like the title. And this is an older character. In the books, it was a young man. That in the books, he was just young and gullible and kind of just bought into whatever Louis was saying. And what I love constantly, I'm going to say about the contrast is that even though the character is older, it's actually the same character from the books. And that so much of any change that takes place still kind of like threads itself to the book. So the book, the physical book, Interview with the Vampire that we read, that all still took place. And at the end of the book, when I think Louis scares Danielle Malloy and takes off, that still happens. And now here we are in a pandemic, modern times, that they decided to carry on into the story of Interview with the Vampire. Danielle Malloy is older, and Louis once again wants to tell his story. Now the passage of time has elapsed for both characters, and Louis wants a bit of a do-over with that interview, as well as Danielle Malloy, because he's at a different time of his life. He's more of a seasoned journalist that's willing to challenge what Louis says. So Louis begins to tell his story about him being a pimp in Storyville and supporting his family, being head of household in a way because his father has passed. And you really see how his character has to juggle all these hats of being a proxy head of household, as well as, you know, someone running his own establishment, trying to put his foot in the door of all these seedy establishments. And in doing so, he has to try to protect his employees, his sex workers, as well as deal with customers that are violent and racist, and just having to put it on a smile and smooth things over just so that his establishments could survive. And even with that all going on, he's also dealing with his own internalized homophobia. And you see that right off the bat, really early on, and how also because of the world he lives in doesn't accept people that are gay, just with like one of the prostitutes saying, you know, oh, you're damned if you do that. There's so much being crammed in within a scene that really lays a groundwork right away for what Louis is up against in the life that he leads. And so that's all in Storyville. And within the scene with Storyville, his brother gets introduced. And as soon as I just saw the character of his brother, the actor acting as Paul, I actually got misty-eyed because that is the one thing that I knew I wanted, but in the movie that was made in the 1990s, I think in 96 maybe, Louis's family wasn't even a part of the story. And so the fact that they're including his family just sent me over the moon. Something about that character and what Paul symbolizes really touched my heart when I read the book for the first time, and also when I read it for the second time recently, prepping for the show. And to see that his family is on the show, and specifically his brother, just made me so excited. I'm so glad that that was something that they decided to adapt into the story. From the Storyville scene, we go on to meeting Louis's family, and within the conversation of the dynamics between Paul and his religiosity and his sister that's engaged to be married, and what else? There is mention of the Mayfair witches. So apparently they live nearby. So I'm interested to see where that goes. But again, it was just like another scene where we're getting a more enriched character of Louis by meeting his family. And I love the dynamics. I love the connection and joy that they have, even if they have like little squabbles. It's just really endearing, and I really love it. From that scene, Louis takes his brother Paul to church, and you kind of see the dynamics actually of how Paul has this religious fervor, but the people around him don't really believe in him, or they don't take him seriously. And so much so that not even the priest giving him, participating in Paul's ritual of confession, don't take him seriously either. But you know what? They really enjoy that money that Louis gives them. So that's kind of the dynamic that they set of the relationship between Louis and the church and Paul and the church. Something else that's going on this show with Paul is that I wanted to point out is that they're making it very clear from the first episode that not only is Paul very religious, but he has mental health issues. And that was something that they definitively did in the show that was ambiguous in the books. In the book, Louis takes great offense to someone saying that his brother is crazy. The character of Louis in the books feels that there's a sense of pride and arrogance that is behind in dismissing someone that's so close to you, and what they're capable with it within their beliefs of God, or how they engage with God and the church. So that's definitely different. But we'll talk about that as we go on. The next scene is that Louis meets Lestat in a brothel, and I don't remember how they met in the books, but in this show they meet at a competitor's brothel that Louis frequents just for his own peace of mind, because again, this is also kind of related to him not accepting himself as a gay man. And right off the bat, when Lestat and Louis meet each other, there's already that friction. There's just like, they're both having a conversation, but it's like almost like they're having two different conversations. So there's almost, when I think about it, it's almost this trope of like enemies to lovers in a way that I never thought about. But I really enjoy, right off the bat, the actor Sam Reed playing Lestat. He already has this look at Jacob Anderson's Louis that's already showing admiration and lust when he's talking to him. He's rubbing another character's leg, but also looking at Louis, and it's almost like those actions that take place of Lestat touching this female that's sitting next to him. I almost feel like, that's what he wants to do to Louis, right? This is where this sets the tone for the fact that he's after Louis, right, as a partner. And not only that, but the prostitute Lily that they're right next to really kind of sets up another scene of the three of them together, which I really like. So Louis also establishes to the interviewer, Daniel Malloy, that he was like angered, frustrated, didn't like this person across from him, but also admired him at the same time. So, and I almost feel like they probably didn't even just say it. You could really just see it and hear it in the dialogue of them and realize that that's like a friction that's also turns into like passion. It's just it's got to be so difficult to like toe those lines, and I really loved it. The next scene after that is Lestat and Louis, among other businessmen figures, playing a poker game, and that's the scene where Lestat symbolically shows his cards to Louis, which is he's already kind of again laying the groundwork for making it clear that Lestat sees Louis as his equal, and that he's like on his side in a way. And he does this by showing Louis his powers, not just manipulating him, but actually showing like, look what I could do. Look at this parlor trick, if you will, to kind of make Louis feel like he's in on it in a way. So that kind of establishes their friendship. So as their friendship builds, Louis, even in modern times, reflects back on the time of when him and Lestat were getting to know each other, and he was showing Lestat around the town. And I think he still has a perception that Lestat was really just in love with the town. But I think as he's saying that, what he's not saying is, I think Lestat was already in love with him. Like, his love for the town and Louis is like interlocked. And I just love seeing that, like, visually, like Lestat looking at Louis in the past and overhearing that narration with Louis in the present, and like him not really getting that, I think, in my opinion. And also in modern times, I think Louis looks back at that time and also thinks that ultimately he was being hunted by Lestat, which also could be very true, right? There's this love, but also this like power dynamic at play here. And Lestat very much wants Louis. So yeah, I could see how that could also be true. And the next scene is Lestat being introduced to, hey sweetie, to Louie's family. And so there's this whole dinner scene, and it's definitely the scene like when you bring a significant other for the first time to meet your family, and you want it to go well, but then Lestat lets his naughty temper that he has get the best of him, and so he ends up like getting into it a little bit with Paul, with Louie's brother. And so yeah, so there's that. And also this is a scene where we see Lestat is like trying his best to hold back on his powers, maybe trying to downplay in a way how powerful he is, because he doesn't want to scare off Louis, but it seeps through at times, right? And so it definitely did in this scene with the family. So after this time, we realize that Louis and Lestat have kind of been like in this honeymoon phase of their friendship, and Lestat wants to take it to another level. So he invites him over, and once again, Lily is at Lestat's home, at his place of residence, and the same dynamic happens where Lily is kind of used as a buffer, because Lestat wants to get it on with Louis, and so there's kind of like, let's bring her in, like the three of us. But then Lestat uses his powers to make Lily go to sleep so that they could just, go to town on each other, which they do. And I really appreciate in this show how they're very explicitly making, not making because they are in the books, exhibiting that the characters are gay, because in the books it was always very subtle or implicit, if I remember, in how the first book was. And so although later on in the books Anne Rice attempts to like correct that and make it very clear that Louis and Lestat were together, having it be very clear makes their dynamic make more sense, actually, that we know very solidly they love each other, they're in a relationship, and are attracted to each other. Because sometimes in the book there's just so much of Louis sorry, my cat, saying how much animosity he has for Lestat. At some point in the book you're like, okay, why are you there? Like, why are you with him then? So I feel like that, like, it's a a really great correction that I really enjoyed. But, okay, sorry, I'm getting distracted by my cat. So after they have this scene that not only gives an opportunity for Louis to fully accept himself, embrace himself, it opens up the doors for him to connect and have an intimacy emotionally with someone that he's never really let himself have before. And I think that scares Louis, so he just hightails it and stays away from Lestat. He's kind of like, he's basically not ready. So from there, he basically rebuffs Lestat and just ignores him. I have all my notes. So the next scene is the wedding of Louie's sister Grace, and it's a scene that I really loved. It takes place at nighttime, and you see all the family together, and they're engaging in family traditions. And there is even a scene of Paul and Louis dancing, like, how do I say, as a tradition that typically the father does, but they perform this tradition in the place of their father that's passed. And again, it's reinforcing the chemistry and relationship between these two brothers, that there's this strong bond between them and just so much love with everyone. And it was really just like this beautiful celebration. And from there, dawn comes, the wedding's over, the sun is starting to rise, and Louis and Paul go up to the rooftop, and you get the sense that this has to be something that they've done since they were little kids, to go sit on the rooftop and just spend time together and chat. And okay, first of all, I think I'm pretty sure I already said that this is always going to be spoiler talk, but also make sure you look up trigger warnings, because the next section I'm going to talk about is suicide. And so they're up on the rooftop, and I'm going to say something on a personal note to make sure that this comes off correctly. I just want to be as delicate as possible. I had someone in my life when I was younger that committed suicide, and there's something that personally, I don't expect anyone to agree, but I felt like they really got right with this scene. And it's that sometimes when people decide to take their life, there's a sense of calm. There's a stage where a person can feel calm because they're at peace with their decision. They've already decided to end their life. And that's what I felt came across in the scene, is that they've just had this really joyous night of being a part of Grace's wedding. And Paul is talking to Louis, and what he is doing is he's going over a checklist in his mind. That's how I take it. There's like a resolve to it. It's like, my sister's getting married. She's going to be okay. Louis is no longer involved with Lestat, so he's going to be okay. Third thing is, he suggested to Louis that he get married. Like, you know, he's trying to make sure everyone's taken care of, so that he knows that when he dies, he could be right with his family in a way. And he even tells his brother that he loves him before he jumps off the roof. And this is also part of what I wanted to say was different from the books, because in the books, when Paul's character dies, it's almost ambiguous if he stumbled down some stairs or if he actually tried to kill himself. So again, the show is making like a very concise answer that Paul committed suicide. And what I also love about this scene is that the change that they made, that this moment is actually the last time Louis ever saw sunrise. And that from that, it's like he never wants to see another sunrise again, which is different from the books, because in the books, it's Lestat that he's with. And that's what Lestat does for him. He's like, let's experience this sunrise for the last time, because this is the last one you're going to see, because you're going to transition into being a vampire. And so I feel like this reinforces the bond in a way that he had with his brother, and the complicated dynamic that he had with his brother. I thought it was really beautiful and heart-wrenching that that's something that Louis would turn away from, that he would be okay with never seeing one again, because that moment like marred his life. And so I really thought that was beautiful. And something that they continued on with in line with the book was that Paul's death then clouds or fractures the relationship that Louis has with the rest of his family, because they feel that there's got to be some way that Louis is responsible for his brother's death. They can't really, they just can't accept that he committed suicide, you know. And so that's very much in line with the books, where there's this beginning fracture of his connection to his family that was such a strong bond that would make it possible and easier for him to be with Lestat. And Lestat at this point cannot be ignored any longer. Louis goes to the church because he's so in so much pain and grieving for his brother. And then Lestat turns up, and because Lestat is such a emotional person, and he's probably been holding back all these powers that he has, it could be very easy for him to just like control everyone if he really wanted to. So he just lets that emotion and power burst through. And so ultimately this is a scene where Louis becomes a vampire, and this is where my memory gets a bit muddled. I felt like in the show it makes so much sense for Louis to become a vampire in this moment, even though he's also seeing Lestat commit so much violence. I think that he's just in this like downward spiral, at a loss for his brother, at a loss for his family in a way. And so seeing a man that he like loves across from him, that really sees him and it wants to embrace him and like make a home with him, is like, it's almost like a form of escapism, right? And so that's why he ultimately agrees to become a vampire. And I love that moment because you're really seeing, there's a lot of like profile shots of both characters looking at each other. And then the orchestra music just like becomes louder and more dramatic. And I felt like it encapsulated the experience of a person becoming a vampire in Anne Rice's world. So that was the end of the first episode. I loved it. It was everything I wanted and more. I probably, this is the episode, you know, I was just so glad to see Paul on screen. That meant a lot to me because it just really captures the dynamic and the human connection that Louis has, not just to his family, not to his brother, but his complicated relationship with religion. So I can't stop talking about it. It was just really incredible. I really loved it. And so I have a couple of questions. It's not really just my question. It's a lot of the fans I see have a theory about the book and the show. And so I'll ask you, do you think, sorry, that was my cat. Do you think Lestat was responsible for Paul's death? Some people think that maybe because we're seeing the story from Louis' point of view, so in the books that not only may Paul have possibly fallen down the stairs or pushed himself down the stairs, but maybe Lestat was already on the hunt to make Louis his partner, so maybe he pushed him because you know, Lestat moves so quick you can't really see him through his vampiric powers. So that was something that I wanted to ask. The other question I have is, why is it that Louie'S wants his story to be told now? One of those points that would create a trajectory is, in this world, the pandemic has also happened. Louis has also made it known that he's bored. So I don't know if he's also feeling like a bit at the end of his life. I'm just not really sure why he'd be willing to have a book published and not really consider the consequences. Like, will people believe that vampires exist if this interview gets published? Or will it make Danielle Malloy look crazy? And I have other questions, but I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. I'm going to try to go episode by episode. And okay, so those are my questions. I have 2 predictions for the series overall. Apparently there's only going to be 7 episodes. So I already don't think they're going to tell the whole book in one season. Because the second season has already been greenlit. I think they're going to, at the very least, tell the first book in 2 seasons while also integrating other elements. There could always be like maybe flashbacks of Lestat's past or something like that. I don't know. So my prediction is, I think the show, the first season, is going to end with Lestat like halfway in, or yeah, halfway in. That's a lie. No, within the first third of the book, which is Claudia and Louis attempting to kill Lestat. That's where I think it's going to end for the entire show. And my second prediction is, I think there's going to be someone from the Mayfair family showing up. And I just don't know who, because I never read the Mayfair books. I only read, I read Merrick recently, and I read Blackwood Farm, which also has to do with the Mayfair witches. So I'm wondering if Merrick is going to show up in modern times. I don't know. There's going to be a Mayfair witch showing up, and I just don't know where. I don't know if there's going to be one that shows up in the past, like they're going to include it in the narrative, or in the present, or both. So those are kind of like my predictions. But I'd like to know what you think about that, and we'll go from there. But I enjoyed it. I love it. I knew I was going to love it. I'm not one of those picky fans, so I'm over the moon with the adaptation and how they really stuck with the, really like the core of what the show is. It's really cool. So the first episode has just been like an absolute joy to watch.